I don't like using MCAT and GPA to apply to schools. I want students to look at Ask the Dean, episode 14, I believe. We are live, not just in our Mapped members group, but also live out to the rest of the world on YouTube and our Mapped Facebook group. Hello, Dr. Scott Wright.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going. It's a
Good
fun
afternoon.
day.
Yeah,
Mapped
it is a
is
fun
live as a public beta with my co-founder here, Rachel Grubbs. How are you?
Hello, hello. I'm well.
I'm glad you are well. It's been a little bit of a crazy day, starting early at 7 Pacific, pushing Mapped out live to the world, and then seeing nothing crash and burn, which is good. It's always a good thing.
Right?
Lots of testing. So ask the Dean if you have not watched us, listened to us before. It's a Q&A episode, Q&A series that relies on you asking questions. And then Dr. Scott Wright, myself, and Rachel will chime in often with a lot of MCAT responses. She's the MCAT expert. We're here to answer your questions. So let's go ahead and start off with our first question.
Whoa.
Our first question here. Hello, everyone. Do medical school... multiple questions.
Oh, my.
Do medical school admissions committees put more weight on undergraduate GPA than master's, even though the major for both levels of study is sciences? Majority, I'm assuming. That's what that meant. 2, and then do they put more weight on undergraduate GPA than MCAT score? Thank you in advance. I like these questions, Scott, because it helps really, hopefully, clarify the one size does not fit all model.
Right.
What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so let me just kind of back up a little bit and really give you a sense of what, and I'm gonna really refer more to the second question first, and that is the undergraduate GPA. While it is a number, just like the MCAT score is a number, it tells admissions committees a different thing. It gives them information about a different aspect of an applicant. So the undergraduate GPA addresses the long haul. It addresses focus in the classroom, ability to work hard, persevere, study hard over a long period of time. It addresses the work ethic of an applicant, really. While the MCAT score really addresses a one-time shot kind of thing, a one-time sort of issue of, I was able to sit and take this exam. Yes, there's a lot of preparation before that, but so it really addresses a much different aspect of the applicant than a GPA does. And so in answer to the number 2 question, I would say no, that there's not one that is weighted more than the other necessarily at all. It's a combination of the two that gives the admissions committee a sense of who is this applicant academically, cognitively, how are they at high stakes testing. Obviously, in most of these students' lives, their MCAT experience is going to be the highest stakes testing experience that they've ever had in their entire life. Yeah. That will increase as they get to medical school and do licensure exams and things like that. But so it addresses 2 different things. And so I don't think that one is necessarily weighted more than the other. We get this question often, does one offset the other? If I have a low GPA and a high MCAT score, will one offset the other? It doesn't really work that way at all. Yeah. More to the issue of the first question, I think that depends on the institution. And I would not say that one is weighted greater than the other. So, for example, if you have a student who, which is not unusual with non-traditional students or postbac students, where you have a student who did not do extraordinarily well in their undergraduate experience, and then they go to a master's program and take it. Maybe it's in the same field, maybe it's more general biomedical sciences type field, like many of the postbac programs are. and they do really well. Some medical schools will look at that and say, well, this shows that they can do the work. There are other medical schools which will acknowledge that graduate school is different than undergraduate school. The grading is different. So, for example, you don't make a lot of C's in graduate school, because if you do, you're out. You get kicked out. A couple of C's, you're on really thin ice. Whereas undergraduate programs are. So, I think the schools that do look at that as different, the master's program or the graduate GPA is different, are making that differentiation. They're saying, well, these are really two different things. It's not to say that they don't look at the graduate GPA and acknowledge it and also use it in their determination, but it could be that they do not think as highly of it. But other schools will do that and will say, here's a student that was able to get their stuff together and do well in a master's program, and in the sciences in particular is a strong indication that they can do the work. So, what are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I think, again, responding to answer one here, the admissions committee is putting more weight on undergraduate than masters. I think the feedback that I've gotten from students, right, and obviously that's the majority of my experience is just listening to students. The majority of the feedback is it seems like most medical schools are relying on undergraduate GPA as a filter of your abilities. And that's not to say I've had some amazing guests on the Premed years who really, really struggled in undergrad. And then for financial reasons, right? Because a lot of postbacs, you can't get financial assistance for postbacs, but you can get financial assistance for master's programs. And so they go that route because that's the only way they can, and they do great, and they get into medical school just fine, not a problem. So there's no one size fits all. Unfortunately, right? Our jobs would be so much easier if it was just all black and white.
Right. Or we might not have jobs if it was so black and white.
And that's okay. Then everyone's getting into med school just like they want. I'll find something else to do. So that's a good one to start with. What else we got? All right, my friend Suzanne, from your experience and talks to admissions committees, do you think that schools will look less at MCAT scores since step 1 is now pass-fail, and don't know if there is still a correlation? That's interesting. I haven't really thought about that, right? Step 1, for those of you who don't know, step 1 is going to pass-fail in 2022, I believe. And so there's always been this very weak correlation, which I hate that word because correlation doesn't mean anything. There's an amazing website called like Spurious Correlations or something, where it's like the amount of cheese consumed in a year versus the amount of drownings in a hot tub. Like it's correlated. Like, don't eat cheese. So there's a very weak correlation between MCAT and step 1. Obviously, right, just logically thinking, good test takers are good test takers. That doesn't go away from step 1 to MCAT, et cetera, et cetera. So this change happened, I think, right around the time that you were leaving TMD SAS. What are your thoughts with this?
Yeah, I think that I don't think that medical schools are going to look less, excuse me, at the MCAT score because of this. There is also, albeit somewhat weak, there is a correlation between MCAT score and the basic sciences in medical school. But even more than that, I think what the MCAT does represent is the same thing for everyone. While GPA varies because of school they go to or major they are in or the amount of time it takes them to get through their undergraduate experience, it varies so much. The MCAT score is the one thing that is common. And so I think that because of that, there's going to be a continued reliance on the MCAT to see that in the process. Now, what I would also say in the studies, in the correlation studies that have been completed with regard to the MCAT and how they perform in medical school, as well as the MCAT and how they do in step one, they are flawed studies in that they only include students who got into medical school.
Mm.
So if a student scored a 480 something on the MCAT and didn't get in, it may well correlate very highly to their ability to perform well in medical school, but we won't know that because they didn't get in.
Yeah.
So it's only using the sample of those students who actually got into medical school. And so I'd say that with just a little bit of reluctance to say that I don't think that the MCAT will change a lot in terms of how admissions committees view it because of step one changing.
Yeah.
Because in medical school, they use a lot of exams that are shelf exams.
Yep.
For and very similar to standardized testing. So there's a lot of different parts of the medical experience beyond step one that are still going to be very similar, and may well correlate to some of these shelf exams in a certain in biochemistry, for example.
Yeah. And just for reference, for those listening who don't know what a shelf exam is, it's an exam that the medical schools buy from the MBME, right? I think it's MBME that they buy them from.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a standardized. It's almost like a mini step, like a pre-step exam that's standardized for each of the different subjects that you're studying in your clinical rotation. So, yeah, it's fun. Lots of tests. You become a professional test taker in college. Hopefully, my hope is that there are more ways to review an MCAT score after this pandemic that schools will now allow, because they see the differences, they see the challenges, they recognize it a lot more. So hopefully we'll see.
Agreed.
And we'll have more data, right? Talking about the data, we're going to have data of a good percentage of students who are going to get admitted to medical school without having taken the MCAT, more than the kind of early assurance kind of pathways that have always been there, right? And I don't know if there's any data, any studies looking at those students and how they do, but obviously, again, those are really stellar students for getting admitted early. So we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully some changes, because the MCAT is a beast.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Out of curiosity, I'd like to ask Dr. Wright. All right, this one's for you. Can you give us any insight into what happens when the admissions committee meets? Oh, it's a pillow fight, right? How much discussion is there? Is there another anyone applicant? I don't know what that means. Does a member that interviewed someone ever get really excited to tell people about that applicant, et cetera? So give us some behind the scenes.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think it addresses the applicant's interest in knowing more about the mystery of what happens when I submit my application. It goes into this big black box. I have no clue what's going on inside that big black box. And it drives me crazy. And that's the part that I think is really hard for applicants to sort of deal with, and it's just such a mystery. And so I think this question it really addresses that. And I think obviously we say this over and over and over again, but it's going to vary a lot by medical schools in terms of how they do their process, what the composition of their admissions committee is, who's on it, how many people are on it, what those people do in terms of their experience on the committee. So it's going to vary a lot. I think in general, admissions committees are typically faculty members. They can be non-science. They can be clinical faculty members. They can be basic science faculty members. Most schools like to have a mixture of those people, particularly people who have a lot of student contact, directors of courses, people that actually teach in the courses with the students. Also, clinical faculty who have a lot of responsibility with the students in the course of their duties. And so there's going to be a variety of different kinds of people. On occasion, there will be community physicians who are perhaps alumni of the institution. And there are sometimes students. There can be fourth-year medical students, for example, who are on the committee. My experience has typically been that students that are on the committee do not have voting privileges because they're not faculty, and the licensure, the accreditation is very clear about it as the faculty's responsibility to choose the students in the admissions process. So if there are students on the admissions committee, they would be non-voting members, and they would be there to participate. But ultimately, when it comes down to a vote, they don't have a chore there. Different medical schools will do it differently in terms of how many. At UT Southwestern, where I was, we had a small committee of about 10 members. They generally did not interview students themselves. They were seasoned professionals in terms of the admissions process. They had been interviewers for many years, but they were brought together and the reason for that was to remove bias. Was to remove, well, I interviewed this student, and I'm going to really be an advocate for this student. And what we wanted was to have an unbiased group of people who are looking at everyone and sort of making decisions based on that experience. But different committees are different. Sometimes committees are very large. There might be 40 or 50 faculty members on an admissions committee. You may not have all 40 or 50 in the same room at the same time, or quite rarely would. But they are going to talk about the applicant. Typically, they're going to have either, in the old days, we would project on the screen in the room the information about the student. Often their picture was there. Sometimes medical schools don't have their picture there and are relying just on the information about MCAT score, GPA, trends, their sort of a synopsis of the letters of recommendation, their interview results, if they're quantitative, but also the actual written documentation, the narrative of the interview results, just everything possible. These days, it's more likely that the admissions committees would be in a room where there would be a lot of laptops and they would be viewing this stuff online. And then they're going to talk about the applicant, and they're going to talk about each applicant, and how long they talk about each applicant will vary. With an applicant that's very straightforward, it might be very limited amount of discussion. With an applicant that has a much more complicated application, perhaps they were a postbac student in a second career and had not done well in their original undergraduate and had come back, or maybe it's a student who had taken the MCAT 4 times and finally, really did okay. So it could vary. So if you can imagine schools that get, let's say 10,000 applications, let's say they interviewed 1,200 students. That's still a whole lot of students that they're interviewing. And in a given admissions committee meeting, they might be there for 2 or 3 hours at the meeting. And they're trying to get through 100 or more applicants in those 2 or 3 hours. So you can imagine that some of the applications might only get a very short discussion, maybe a few minutes, whereas other applications might get more extensive review and richer discussion with regard to their fit for the institution or their ability to do well in medicine, et cetera, whatever. And so it might be a more lengthy discussion, 10 minutes. My experience is that that it does vary pretty widely, depending on the applicant. So that gives you a little bit of a viewpoint about what happens in an admissions committee meeting, and it's a fascinating process. It's very enjoyable. But I can assure you, in my experience, both at my own institution as well as my extensive contact with deans of admissions from around the country, that the admissions committee members, in the largest way, are very much committed to what they're doing. They're committed to doing it the right way, the best way they can for the institution and for medicine in general. And so they take it very seriously, and they put their heart and soul into it. It's one of the most important committees at a medical school. Being on the admissions committee is an honor, and it is a huge commitment of time and effort. And in my experience, I never had anybody on the committee that wasn't fully committed to what they were doing. And so you can rest assured that they're really putting a lot of their soul into what they're doing.
A committed committee. That's what we need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely.
Nice little behind the scenes. It's funny. When we were I think it was when we were in Toronto together speaking at that admissions conference, I had told you it'd be really cool at the meetings that TMDSAS had for the medical schools every year. I forget what you called them. You had a special name for them, but it would be cool to have packets of applications and give the same application to all the different schools, and I would come down and record that as content to really get a good insight into how everyone thinks about the same type of applicant.
We've done that before at the advisor conference in Texas, as well as I did it when I was associate dean at UT Dallas, the undergrad campus. We did that to give the students that very kind of, or the advisors, that very kind of sense of what is this like, and how different people can interpret the same application in very different ways. So it is a fascinating experience. Absolutely.
And I think what you just said, right? How different schools, different people, even different people at the same school will interpret an application. And so that's where I always get into a sticking point when the feedback from some pre-health advisors is very black and white, and it's never black and white.
No,
and so it's always a struggle when I hear that feedback from students. But
absolutely.
All right, good discussion. Thank you for that behind the scenes look there. All right, so what are some good ways to prepare for the MMI style of interview? Was the MMI around when you were at UT Southwestern? Yeah.
No, it came later. There were schools that were doing something similar to that, but in terms of the actual MMI experience, which was developed in Canada and McGill, I think McMaster, and it came a little bit later in that sort of formal style.
Yeah, thanks, McMaster. Same team that brought us the Casper test as well.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on the MMI?
I think that practice is great with advisors or other students. And you can go to the internet and find lots of sample interview questions. And what these interview questions are typically in the MMI are, and just to make sure our students understand, MMI stands for multiple mini interview. And so typically you're going to have 6 to 8 or so stations, and you're going to go to one station, and you're going to have a few minutes, maybe 1 minute, to read the scenario, whatever it is, and then you go into the room and you're going to respond. You're going to have about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more, to respond to the interviewer with regard to this scenario. It could be an ethical scenario. It could be interpersonal skills type scenario where they're looking for different things. And then you go to the next station. And it's kind of a round robin sort of thing. And so I think, schools that are doing it well in terms of advising will help students and set up something similar to this and help them run through it. But even if your school doesn't have anything like that, or if you don't have an advisor, I think getting friends together, finding sample interview questions on the internet, and then trying it out and doing it is a very good way of getting your mind quick enough to think about what is this, and also not getting so stuck in the mode of there's a right answer and then there's a wrong answer. That's not necessarily what they're looking for. Now, yes, there are wrong answers. You could go in there and be super bizarre and stuff. That would not be good. But it's not necessarily a black and white kind of, oh, they answered it right or they answered it wrong. So,
yeah, most MMI scenarios have a rubric associated with them where the interviewer is scoring you. Did you cover this? Did you cover that? Not did you specifically say X, Y, and Z? I like to tell students the MMI should be fun. And I've gotten messages from students that are like, "Oh my God, Dr. Gray, that I had a blast. Thank you for letting me know that it was okay to have fun with this."
Yeah.
If you treat the MMI like real life, then usually I see students do better. Meaning, go in and have a conversation, right? If you're sitting down for dinner and your friend across from you goes, "Oh man, did you see in the news XYZ?" Right? Some sort of moral, ethical thing, right? Did you see in the news? You have a conversation about that. That's all the MMI is. And the interviewer is just listening to you. And usually there's a little bit of back and forth. Sometimes there's not. And the more that you can just understand that the goal is to have that conversation for the interviewer to understand your thought process on why you're saying the things you're saying, and really just enjoy yourself, the better you will be.
That's great advice.
The goal with both, and I always have to say this, the goal with both the normal traditional interview, one-on-one interview, and the MMI with your preparation is not to be prepared for every single question that could come your way.
Right.
In my interview book, I have a list of like 600 questions. I didn't want to put a list of questions in my book because students will go question by question. Do I have an answer for this? Okay, what's my answer? They'll script out their answers for every single question. Right. The goal of preparing for the interviews is to understand that you can answer anything that comes your way in the blink of an eye. Our brains are powerful supercomputers. We can figure it out. So just know that you can get where you need to go. So, with that said, there you go. That's a good book right there. I've seen that one.
There it is.
The Premed Playbook Guide to the Medical School Interview.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
Need to get one of those, and lots of good stuff in here.
All right, next question. I do have an MMI book actually that is halfway done, or not. It's about a tenth of the way done actually. All right.
Next question.
Rachel's scrolling for some good questions. All right. What should be done if you already submitted your application with your estimated volunteer hours but are not able to reach those hours now due to COVID?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think everyone's in that same boat, right? Yeah. Applications didn't go in until after COVID. So I think medical schools understand that the estimated hours for most students are going to be out of whack. And just for clarification, I believe TMD-SAS does not allow for estimated hours, but you can put the extra timeline, but not estimated hours. Is that correct?
Right. And you can also, at TMD-SAS, at the Texas service,
you can put future activities.
Yeah, you can. And you can also update that.
That's right.
You can send an update to TMD-SAS and say, hey, I thought I was going to do this, but because of whatever, I couldn't do that. So instead I'm doing this or whatever. And we'll send it out to the schools.
Yeah. So TMD-SAS is flexible. TMD-SAS, the more that I learn, is just it's the best application service. So
awesomeness.
And the first.
Yes. 1969.
Yes. A COMIS is the one that I'm pretty sure you can't update hours. Like you can't estimate hours. You can put the time stopping, like the stop date in the future, but you can't estimate hours. AMCAS, they tell you to estimate hours. So every application service is a little bit different. But just understand that schools know and they understand, and it is what it is. Is virtual shadowing accepted as shadowing hours? I only have 6 hours of in-person shadowing with cardiologists as part of a summer internship. I apply next cycle. All right. So the good thing going is next cycle. All right. So we got some time.
Yeah.
This is obviously something we've been talking a lot about with COVID and quarantine and staying home and everything else. The shadowing, volunteer, everything's just kind of stopped. And so, virtual shadowing is better than nothing.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely, you got to do what you can do, and it's all you can do.
Yeah. So the general advice that we've been giving is put it on your application and let the medical schools decide what they want to do with it.
Yep, exactly. Because we're doing virtual everything right now. So
yeah, that is true. Do you think it is a good idea to apply this cycle without an MCAT to schools that made the MCAT optional? My community college GPA is 3.87, undergraduate or university GPA 3.75. I've been getting this question a lot because more and more schools are jumping on the bandwagon. Unfortunately, it's still not a lot of schools, but more schools are jumping on the optional MCAT bandwagon.
Well, so my feeling about this is that, all he said is MCAT is his GPA. Mm-hmm. So we don't really know anything about other things about the application.
But it's just MCAT and GPA. That's all that matters, Scott, right?
Yeah, no. So we don't know anything about, clinical activities or anything else. So if we just are focused on GPA here, then I would say, sure, why not? Why not apply? It's particularly to those schools that don't have MCAT as required, and see what happens. The only, in my experience, the only absolute in the admissions process to medical school is if you do not apply, you will not get in.
Yep.
So
do you know my saying on that? I have my own saying for that. I said your chances of getting into medical school are 0 if you don't apply, and greater than 0 if you do apply.
If you do apply, exactly. So answer this question, I would say sure. Why not? And then if you don't get in, you apply the next year with an MCAT score, and you're good to go. So I would say why not?
Yeah, my only caveat to that is it's August 24th right now. My assumption is the students that email me this question, I've gotten it probably a half a dozen, if not a dozen times already, is the students are very much in the rush to do something. They haven't done their personal statement. They haven't written any of their extracurriculars. They haven't prepared anything for their application. And so my fear is that they're going to rush that side of it. They're not going to put together a good application, a good story of who they are. They have to rush and get letters of recommendations from people in a time crunch. And usually that just ends badly. Take your time. It's a long process. Take your time and apply next year's is usually my advice. Unless you have it all ready to go and you were just sitting on an application, which most people aren't doing that. But Whew, all right. Rocking and rolling.
Good questions this week.
I have to ask. No, you don't have to. You decided to. How much luck? I love this question. How much luck is involved in the process? Why are there low stat applicants who get into better schools than higher stat applicants, assuming they all applied early? I love this question because I go onto Student Doctor Network and Reddit, and they're all like, "Oh, it's just a crapshoot. It's just all luck." And I'm like, no. Some people chose to actually research the schools they applied to and potentially had relationships with the school because they reached out and asked for some help. And what are your thoughts here?
Well, I also think this is a good question, and I think that it's not possible for me to say that luck has no part in the process.
Correct.
It does. Luck has a part in life in general, and whether you call it luck or whatever you want to call it, there is some level of and I'll give you a good example. either luck or bad luck. So I'll give you an example of a student who, has a wreck on their way to the interview.
Mhm.
Well, that's pretty bad luck.
Yep.
So they miss their interview. Maybe they can get back into that school's interview cycle or not, depending on when in the cycle it is.
Yep.
So there is an element of luck in the process. It could depend on what interview you got. What did that interview have for breakfast? Do they feel right? Do they not feel right? So there's a lot of elements there that you could call luck. To the second question though, why are there low stat applicants who get into better schools than higher stat applicants? And the premise of this question is stats.
Yep.
It's not all about the stats.
Yep.
It's all about that's exactly right. Stats are not the whole story. Yep. Stats are part of it, but there's a richness about applicants that comes with their application that is not about the numbers. And so if you, and that's why I always, I rarely think it's a good idea to compare, well, I know Johnny Smith and he got a, 508 on his MCAT score.
That's all student doctor.
I had a 5. Yeah, that is all it is. And I had a 512. Well, why didn't I get in? And my MCAT's better than his MCAT, and he got in, and I didn't.
Because that arrogance showed in your essays.
Yes,
I'm amazing, and you need to accept me because I'm amazing, and I'm amazing, and amazing.
Or in the interview,
in the interview,
that comes across, that kind of thing.
I've heard some good stories from admissions committee members and deans and directors of admissions about interviewees and just the arrogance that some of them have. Yeah,
it's really amazing. Yeah, it is. it really is.
Yeah, it's not just stats. So yes, like if you want to play the compare stats game, you can. None of it means anything though when you just look at stats. So it's hard. Right. Yeah, the luck thing. Obviously, there is luck involved with who's reading your application, what kind of day they're having today. Did they are they going through something in their home life that's going to distract them from really connecting with your application, right? Yeah. But that's life. Like every single day we have that type of quote unquote luck that dictates our entire life. So you can't say this process has luck involved if you're going to ignore everything else in life too.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
I always think about the there's a good data or a good study on parole board hearings and the people who hear the parole board hearings and appeals. Like if it's earlier in the day, like the percentage of those who are released on parole is like astronomically higher than right before lunch, and it's incredible. It's just like, why are we letting humans do this when we know we are terrible at judgment like this throughout the day?
Yeah, and you do have to note that it is people looking at people. Yep. In whether it's the parole process or whether it's the admissions process to medical school, it's people trying to do the best they can, looking at other people and making decisions. So it is, you could totally write a computer program to do the admissions process. Yep. But you would have it would be interesting to see what kind of doctors you got out at the end of that process.
Yep. In med school applications, quote, best does not mean, quote, best numbers. It's best across many aspects. Having a variety of people in the class benefits everyone.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great little saying there.
That's,
Rachel.
Yeah. We can't hear you, Rachel.
You're muted, Rachel. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, I think, Ryan, you thought you were reading a question from someone, but we get asked.
I started off thinking it was, and then I realized it wasn't.
We get asked this stats-only question so often that I've started transcribing your answers. Yeah. So I just threw up a banner from an earlier quote that you guys gave. Yeah. That's what that was.
Right.
Man, I was like, man, that sounds very smart. Who said that?
I know, right?
Well, so I confused you guys, but what I was trying to do was underline the point that Scott was making, which is It's
Yeah.
humans analyzing humans, which is both bad and sometimes good.
Yep.
In this way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Bueno.
All right. Let's see what we've got next here.
For someone who has extensive, 17,000 plus paid clinical hours, experience hours, how important is physician shadowing? For context, in those hours, I've worked with internal medicine docs and clinic docs. I like this question. My assumption is this is a nurse, potentially. I get this question a lot from
PA
nurses. I'm a nurse. I work with physicians all day long. I don't need to shadow, right? And I said, contraire. Whatever the rest of that saying is. I always challenge that assumption that, I work in a clinical setting, therefore I don't have to shadow. And how I generally respond to that is, you see what you see when you're working next to the physician. You don't see what happens when that physician walks away and goes on with the rest of his or her day. You don't know what it's like when they go back to the physician room, call room, and they sit there for hours dictating their notes, talking to the insurance companies, talking to family members, dealing with everything else. You just see the patient care side of it at the bedside, typically. And so my response is always, you need some shadowing to see the rest of it, just to get an idea of the rest of it.
Yeah. And I think too, I think here's an opportunity for the student in this case to broaden themselves in terms of the specialty. So if they do internal medicine, maybe they could shadow a surgeon, maybe they could shadow an ophthalmologist, maybe they could shadow a pediatrician, to broaden out that experience that they have with other types of doctors who can and therefore get a richer experience with what they're seeing and be able to translate that in an application. So I agree with you, Ryan. I think I wouldn't discount it at all, the value of the shadowing experience that an applicant like this might be able to have.
Yeah. And luckily, with that exposure, hopefully getting shadowing is easy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you would think. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Rockin' and a rollin'. Rebecca asks, what is the best way to develop a school list? Aside from using information from the MSAR, which, if you don't know, is the Medical School Admissions Requirements application from the AAMC, and school website, is there a good way to gauge whether you are a good fit for the school? And I will add, for our DO friends, they have the Choose DO Explorer, which is the DO version of the MSAR.
Yeah.
Building a school list. This is one of my favorite topics because I go way against the grain compared to what students normally do. But I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think this is it's a little difficult because you really don't get a good feel for the institution, the school itself, from the MSAR or from their school website. You can find out, what they say their mission is, or you can find out what they emphasize in terms of what their numbers are. You can find out what, a variety of bits of information about a school from those two things. But I think that the best way to get to know a school is by visiting the school. Number one is going there and seeing what it's like. How do I feel when I walk on this campus? Do I like the surrounding area? Do I like the city it's in? Do I like how it feels when I'm there? Very intuitive sort of idea of what does this feel like, and then talking to students who actually go to that school and say, what do you think? What do you like? What do you not like? This is the value of the interview experience. And obviously you can't get that when you're on the applicant side of things. But if it's possible, now medical schools are very different from undergraduate institutions. They don't have tour guides typically where you can set up a tour and go, and I suppose some medical schools do, but generally no. If you call them up and say, hey, I want to come tour your school, they're going to say, well, sorry.
We have an open house in 6 months, potentially. You can come then.
But I would say, if you're able to, just go there and just park and walk around, and go to the library, go to the anywhere that you're able to go, and you see somebody walking by, a young looking person walking by in a white coat, say, "Hey, are you a medical student? Can I ask you? I'm thinking of applying here. Can I ask you some questions about the school?"
Yeah.
And just see what it's like and see what they say. And I think that could be very valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had an idea for a long time, but with the current life situation, with not even just COVID and the pandemic and everything, but just my wife being a physician and working, I've had this idea. I'm like, it'd be fun to just rent an RV and go on a road trip, bring maybe my cameraman and just go school to school and just go all out and do a video tour of the school and talk with students and just really get a good insight into each of the schools from a up close and personal perspective. It'd be a fun road trip for the future.
Yeah, it would.
Fun little YouTube series. So as you mentioned, right, what in this country we know as the summer before applying to college or whatever it is, the college tour that kids go on usually with their parents or some do. It's not a thing for medical schools. So you usually don't go on a tour of a medical school until you are actually invited for an interview. And obviously now with the pandemic, that's not happening. And I've talked to students, right, the have their school list, and they've said that my top choice school dropped to the bottom when I was on campus. I just didn't like the campus. I didn't like the vibe. I didn't like the culture that I saw, and I dropped it. And the one that I didn't think was going to be a winner moved up to the top because it was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just it's hard to do that if you don't go to the campus. So the things that I generally recommend are use social media. Check out the medical school's YouTube channel. See if you can find, and a lot of times schools potentially have some sort of block on students talking about what school they go to. And so maybe it's not public where they go to. Maybe you can figure it out. On Instagram, you can do location searches. So search a location where there are medical schools and see if you can find medical students, PAs, PTs, other people who are part of that whole medical complex talking about that school and that institution. So all of social media, look on Student Doctor Network, look on Reddit. A lot of times they have individual threads for different schools. Ask questions there. Really just do your research. I don't like using MCAT and GPA to apply to schools. I want students to look at the fit and obviously culture and stuff like that. And so I give this example, and I don't know if I've told this example to you yet, Scott, but I give this example all the time, that our current culture of applying to medical school is based on MCAT and GPA. Students use the MSART. They filter based on their MCAT and GPA. They make their list based on that. And I translate that to students. I said, if students are only applying based on MCAT and GPA, then the medical schools can only accept based on MCAT and GPA. And so all that is doing is perpetuating the stats over and over and over and over again. And if you are below the 10th percentile for MCAT or GPA or whatever it is, and you go, oh, I can't get in there, then you're not allowing the medical school to tell you no. You're telling yourself no. And yes, obviously, we talked about it earlier, applying to medical school is expensive and costs money, and the more schools you apply to, it's harder. I get those arguments, but really, really, really do more research into schools other than MCAT and GPA. And then if you need to narrow down by MCAT and GPA, go right ahead, but do that last.
Exactly.
All right, that's my med school rant. All right, another great saying here that has been up there already. Katie asks, I know we have talked about how COVID has impacted the cycle, but what are your thoughts on how COVID will impact next year's cycle, specifically from a clinical shadowing research hours perspective? I think COVID's going to be in the discussion for 3, 4, 5, 6 years until all of the current students who are trying to get shadowing clinical experience, taking online classes, pass-fail classes, until they get through the application cycle.
Yep.
It is what it is. So
yeah, I agree with that. I think particularly next cycle, depending on how, what happens with COVID. I mean, we may still be sitting in the same place we are now.
No, please no.
I know. I'm the same way, but with the depending on kind of how things play out with a vaccine or whatever, it's a big question mark. But I think you're right. Fauci. Yeah, please.
Yeah. It'll be a while. So that's fine. Again, schools understand they're going through the same thing. Right. We're seeing colleges, as we're recording this, colleges are starting up again. I'm seeing pictures of rushing at sororities and fraternities, and they're just partying like nothing's happening. I'm like, oh my God, please.
It's insane.
Please, no. Yeah. So anyway.
Good.
All right. More questions? We got some more? I can go over a little bit too if we want to go over a little bit. If we got more questions. Rachel's going to come on. All righty, rocking and a rolling.
Yeah.
Cedric asks, I'm a low GPA student for both my undergrad and graduate school degrees. I know, shame on me. I have 0 clinical hours and no shadowing. I was planning to apply next cycle to MD PhD programs, but I feel hesitant about where I stand now versus if I wait for the 2023 cycle. What do you recommend I do? Thanks.
Wow. Well, kudos to you for being up front.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is a good. Am I ready? No, no, you're not. You're not ready, right?
Yeah.
So I always go back to, why are you applying to medical school?
Yeah.
If you have 0 clinical hours and no shadowing, how do you know you want to be a doctor? Why are you doing this? And then I go even further to go MD PhD. Well, why are you applying to MD PhD programs? I hope without any clinical or shadowing, you have a ton of research to show that you're interested in research. If that's not the case, then maybe he's just trolling us, but I don't know. But we get a lot of students like this who are more aspirational than informed about the whole process and what it takes to get in. And these are the students that I really love to like grab them by the shoulders, put earbuds in and say, listen to the pre-med years and come back and talk to me, and really inform them about the process and everything they need to do. The low stats, the low GPA for undergrad and graduate schools, that doesn't bother me as much because we can always fix that with more classes, unfortunately, right? With money and more classes. Right. Obviously graduate and undergraduate, it's like, well, why didn't you fix it the first time or the second time, right? With graduate school. So what are you thinking?
No, I completely agree with you. This whole package bothers me in general. I think that you're right in terms of graduate school, low GPA in both undergrad and graduate school. I question, yes, it's fixable, but the vibe I get from I know, shame on me, it seems a little casual.
Yeah.
Like instead of what is really going on here, this, there needs to be a good deal of self-assessment going on here. Why am I not doing well in school? And what does that mean about my abilities? What does that mean about my study habits? What does that mean about my time management skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The fact that you're somewhat aspirational, or I guess you have been for some time, and yet you have, as you said, Ryan, zero. I mean, the word zero is actually written there. 0 clinical hours and no shadowing. So this whole thing kind of bothers me a lot. I agree with you. I think this is a very problematic, and I do not recommend that. You need to seek out some hefty advising. through your institution or through us, or somebody needs to really sit down with you and really examine.
Even before that, I think self-reflection.
Yeah, definitely.
I always go to, well, why haven't you? Are you saying this because mom and dad are behind you wanting you to be a doctor, and you're resisting, and so you're saying, oh, I think I'm going to apply, but you have zero activities that show you want to do this? So I think the student needs to, and any student in this situation, every student needs to self-reflect, but this student specifically needs a lot of self-reflection on if this is truly what they want, and find out why they haven't spent any time doing the things to show that this is what they want.
Yeah. I agree.
I want to chime in on this one because sometimes I feel like after these brilliant, amazing, and highly experienced guys talk, it's like there's so much unsaid because of the context of their experience. We will never tell anyone, no, you can't be a doctor.
Correct.
We will have tough love, honest conversations with you about how long it might take. And I definitely also agree that self-reflection is part of that. So I just want to say to this person who asked, or to anyone else who's listening, who's going, well, wow, they're really making a big deal out of clinical and shadowing. And honestly, I didn't know it was a big deal. That's what we're trying to enlighten you to.
Yeah.
A lot of people do it last, and we think you should be doing it very early. So if there is a person starting freshman year right now as a pre-med, maybe your first semester you don't, right? Because college is really different than high school. So maybe for this first semester, you're focusing on great grades. But as soon as you get those college study skills down by second semester, we think you should be doing clinical and shadowing, not to prove to the med schools that you're a good applicant, but to prove to yourself that you really are interested in patient care. Because it's one thing to dream about being a doctor. It's one thing to love taking care of your grandma. It is another thing to change the bedpan for someone you never met. So that's the point of this message here is, like, again, not to shame anyone, but just to say, we're trying to help you reassess your priorities.
Yep. No shaming at all. Yeah, you never know until you're in the operating room scooping poop out of a rectum. I've been there, done that. Like, you have to know you love it to really get in there. Oh man, I'll never forget that patient.
It's okay. So it's 1 after the hour. You have time to run a little bit longer. We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more.
I do. Scott, you good?
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
We've got another mini Am I Ready?
All right. I love these. Immigrant D1 student athlete, biochem major, 3-1 master's or grade enhancement program. All right. So undergraduate biochem 3.1. They're asking master's or grad enhancement postbac program. We talked a little bit earlier about master's versus undergraduate and how med schools view each potentially.
Yeah.
Does immigrant D1 student athlete, can we throw that out? Could this answer be for any biochem major or any major with a 3.1 GPA?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly immigrant doesn't really affect me much. A student athlete is particularly a Division I school. I think that does have an impact on a GPA. With the amount of time that they have to commit to their
they're
sport.
athlete students, not student athletes.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that is relevant. But I don't. This is a good question. I think that you could go either direction with this. I think the safer direction, in my view, would be the grade enhancement program. Really going to a postbac program that focuses in on grade enhancement and really addresses some of the lackings of your undergraduate record thus far. Might be the best way to go, but as Ryan pointed out earlier, sometimes there are financial issues with regard to that, which may push you more toward a master's program. And there are, great master's programs out there for postbac students that can be very helpful in this regard. So I think it's a little bit difficult to judge based on just the limited amount of information that we have here.
Yeah. Yeah, I typically encourage undergraduate postbac programs versus a master's.
Yeah, same here.
So
Same here.
that's generally all right.
Yep.
Let's do one more. One more. Let's see what we got. How many shadowing hours is enough? All right, let's finish with a good one. How many shadowing hours is enough if you have a lot of clinical experience? I like this question because it kind of gets to the heart of this pre-med culture of checking off a box, right?
Yeah.
Of if I have quote unquote enough, then I can stop. And my general advice, and I think yours is the same, Scott, is that there is no number to target. It's
That's right.
As an applicant as a whole, you are being judged as a whole with everything that you are doing, seeing how you are spending your time, period.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think it's really an issue here of enough doesn't even fit within the context of, in my view, what this is all about.
Mm-hmm.
The word enough, it doesn't translate. And so I think what you're looking at, I think you need to do some shadowing hours outside of the clinical experiences you have. And it's really about how you talk about these shadowing hours. I've seen students who have limited shadowing hours and limited clinical experiences, but who talk about it in such a way that it's so clear that they got it, that their ability to reflect and really see the meaning of what they were doing and seeing was incredible. And they did well in the process of getting into medical school. I've also seen students who had tons of hours and all they could talk about was what they did. There was no sort of higher level thought process going on there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Tell me about your shadowing. 300 hours. No, tell me about your shadowing. 300 hours. Right? It's like the capturing a soldier. All they say,
name, rank, and serial number.
Name and social security.
Right?
Yeah. How many hours? Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
I wanted to write a little crib note to be like, somewhere in this answer, Dr. Scott's going to say it's not the what, it's the so what.
Yeah, there you go. I almost said it actually, but I basically said it without saying those words.
Just a reminder, right? We're part of the MAP team. Mapped is now live. You can go actually sign up and get a free 2-week trial and get immediate access to Mapped. What you see when you go log in is just the foundation of everything that is going to be built on top of. We have tons of plans, huge aspirations for what this will become. This is not. I think a lot of people think Mapped is Mapped and it's not changing from what we have now, but this is just the beginning, and we just wanted to get it into everyone's hands earlier rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, go check out mapped.com.